Alrighty, I think we're live. Yes. All right. Good deal. Well, good morning. If you can see me and you can hear me in this live stream, let me know. Again, there's all types of technology here, and here I am, obviously just trying to go and learn how to grow some food. Well, welcome to this this week's session of live coaching and questions. And I've got some really good questions I'm going to answer today. I think will be very useful for people watching this. So if you are here again, you'll know how I've formatted this. If not, or if you're just coming on right now, I have taken some questions from my online permaculture design course. And there's a question and answer section there. And we've collectively decided that we would just stream these Q&A sessions live every week, as long as it works out and schedule that way. And so I've taken some of those questions. And today I've also taken a couple of questions that were just on our YouTube channel, which I think will be beneficial for people just on YouTube. And I'm going to answer those. And then at the end of those, I'll open it up for live Q&A. And then you can just use the chat feature on YouTube to ask me some questions. So just when you do that, if there's not a lot of chatter going on the chat for YouTube, you just ask a question. But it would be better if you put a capital Q or the word question in all caps and then ask the question. And that way, if it starts lighting up and there's lots of chat on there, I could kind of search for that Q or the question and go after it. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get with the first question. And let's pull that up. Okay, so this question here I get asked a lot. For a little background even on this question, it's not only permaculture students, but I get multiple calls a week saying, hey, I've just purchased some land. I'm gonna go ahead and paraphrase the question. Hey, I've just purchased some land. I don't have a lot of permaculture experience and I'm busy. And I've found you guys online. I heard about you, watched a video, something like that. What are some things that I should be looking out for, or I should be focusing on right now if they've either purchased land or just bought some land and they want to go move forward to it? That's a really, really good question. And it's something that we should all ask ourselves in some form of way when we're starting this journey, pretty much any journey, right? But yeah, so I've kind of broken this down in like I don't want to say a pyramid, because it's not quite that. It's kind of, there's like 6 categories to look at here. And the 6 categories, there's actually more than that. There's 2 categories, right? And then one category has like 5 in it. And then the other category has like 10 in it, right? So I should probably write it down, but I'm just going to verbally say it. So at the top, where the 2 categories are, it's your personal interview, and that could be your personal interview. It depends on what context. If you're a permaculture designer like myself, it would be the personal interview of the person or persons who own the land and are going to be working on it. If it's your land, then you or your family who's going to stay on the land, or the property managers or the property workers, are going to be the people to be interviewed. So that's one category, right? The property managers. And then the other category is the landscape assessment. So I'm going to go over just slightly on that today, because I've got quite a number of videos where you can kind of watch as I've done some live stuff with real properties on that, right? But I'll go over slightly on that, but I'm going to kind of stick with this category because this one's not really, there's not a lot out there on it. I've been for multiple years now. It's on the back burner. A colleague of mine, Rob Avis, had said, it's the 3 Bs, books, babies, and businesses. And, you just have no time. So last 4 years I've, had my baby girl in businesses, and And then I've been writing this book called Permaculture Consulting. And so these are kind of like an extrapolation out of that, right? So these are kind of the categories under the personal interview part. So at the very top is to ask yourself the question, or ask the property owners a question, like, what are your goals? And so then the follow-up question would be, what do you mean by goals? So this is what's mean by when you ask what are the goals. So the goal would be something like, I want to produce a lot of my own food without chemicals. And their context is important too. There's a number of people who get into permaculture because of health issues. So could be, the goal is to like live in a chemical-free, healthy environment where they spend a lot of time outdoors. That's a big goal right there at the top, right? Another goal might be they don't want to work so hard while achieving goal number one. And that's where permaculture really can come into play over time. So those are like big goals. I mean, you might less than 5, probably 3 and under. You can make a sheet. These are the things that at the top that we're aiming for, the goals. Okay, so that's like the first category. The second one would be desires. Now, and this is kind of a balancing act, maybe a seesaw, because some of these will come in and out, and you can have lots of desires. So a good way to put this would be something like a technique, like a chicken tractor or food forest or herb spiral, something that you might have found online where you're just dangerous enough to go and try to do it. And you're like, oh, and it maybe didn't cost you a whole bunch of money, or maybe it is going to cost you a whole bunch of time, money, and energy. But, something like that, right? So list out some of the things, even if you don't have very much experience or know a lot about it, of the things that you want. Well, I want to have chickens. I want to have goats. I have my daughter, she wants a pony and a horse and, cats and dogs, right? So all of these things that you desire, or the property owners desire, and that's like a second list, and it could be added and edited and subtracted, as time moves on, right? So again, at the top, you got goals, and then desires is your second thing. And then the third is going to be, and this is where, you've got to really kind of come to reality here and look at your time. What is your time that you can realistically spend on this? And this can be broken into two categories as well. The first part of the time is time for installation, which is going to take the vast majority of your time. For example, I'm building our house right now on our farm, and it's a full-time job. I can't do much else other than that right now. Just to give you an example, multiple people call for or reach out for consultation and design for their properties. COVID has actually exponentially created a lot of desire and want for that and need, but I just can't get to it because I'm in an installation phase myself. That's taking the vast majority of my time. Obviously, building any kind of house yourself would be that way. And then the second part of the time category is the time spent like managing it, right? So once it's installed, then it's like managing. And so if you realistically can't see yourself working on your backyard more than 30 minutes a week, that's really going to affect how you design your property, right? So you probably are not going to need to have 6 types of animals on your homestead that demand 3 hours of work a day if you could only do 30 minutes. So it's a realistic kind of grabber that puts you in to a frame, a mind framework where you start making decisions based on reality. Okay, so those are the top 3 of personal interview. The fourth one is skills. So skills, like building a house or a chicken coop or a chicken tractor or planting trees, gardening, working with animals, small animal husbandry, large animal husbandry, solar power. like all those things. So the way to look at it is, what are the skills that you have that you can do? And if you have skill sets that you desire, or that your goals kind of demand, can you learn them, right? So you either have them or you don't. So then can you learn them? And are there people around where you can learn them from? And if not, then can you hire them out? Are there people around you where you can hire them? Or perhaps you had to like fly somebody in. So skills is another one. You either have the skills or you don't. You can learn the skills or you can't. You don't have the time maybe. Or can you hire them from other people? And so that kind of, once you get into hiring, it kind of comes down to the next category, which is your budget. And so that's going to vary for everybody. And budget can be kind of parsed out over time, but I would say time is probably a more realistic way to look at your design and your property more than budget is. But budget for most people is probably going to bring some reality into how your property is going to look. So those are the 6 categories in underneath the category of personal interview. And I did say I would go, there's 2 categories at the top, right? Personal interview, landscape assessment. And I went over kind of 5 categories in the personal interview. In the landscape assessment, there's 10 categories. I'm not going to go over that a whole bunch, but do go look back at my YouTube channel and look for like landscape assessment videos. And I show you that, right? But basically you're looking at restrictions, your climate, their soil, the vegetation, the wildlife, the history of the land, and those things. So that's what most people consider when they're thinking permaculture design. That's like doing your homework before you, and then once you have data, then we use the ethics and the principles of permaculture as a decision-making tool to move forward into your permaculture design. That's just what typically is thought, but then there's this whole personal side that gives you all this other information, like your goals and desires that give you other decision-making factors. So that's a great question. Thanks for that. All right. So let's move on to the next question. Let's see here. Okay, so this question is about GMOs. And I have a video out called Traditional Landscape Design versus Permaculture Landscape Design. I've got 2 kind of videos about that. And I mentioned GMOs there, and there's just, as you would imagine, in the comment section of YouTube, there's a ridiculous amount of thoughts on GMOs. So I think it's probably good to just bring some clarity to GMO, right? So I haven't looked at the data in a couple months, but I would imagine it's the same as it was a couple months ago, maybe half a year ago. But technically, in a GMO crop, there hasn't been any findings or studies or litigation that says that eating GMO food is bad for the human body. So, and that's kind of what's being said, GMOs, are not bad for you. Now, again, I'm like, I don't know why I think truth is important. That statement is true, but it's not the entire truth. So the other part of that is, when you buy GMO seed, you're in a contract where you have to buy the herbicides and potentially the pesticides as well. So yes, GMOs at the moment themselves can be innocent of having bad health to humans, but they don't come singularly. They come as a grouping with chemicals that have now a wide amount of study and litigation against them that shows that they are toxic to the body, and people are now being rewarded millions of dollars by having cancers and whatnot from being around herbicides. So I guess if I was to make another video about GMOs, it would be something like, I also can't just say the word GMO, or I have to give it a preface by saying GMO means GMO plus what comes with GMOs, right? The contract, the farmer's not making much money, being scared that they'll be sued by pharmaceutical companies and the herbicides making people sick. So let's move on to the next question. Again, if you're just coming in and you're just viewing this for the first time, or you're coming, I've got a small list of questions from our permaculture design course that's online, and we have decided collectively to just do these live Q&A sessions on YouTube and just have them there so people can see them. And let's see if there's some added value there. And then it also opens it up to everybody that has a question. Once I'm done with these first few questions, you can just come onto the chat right there, use a capital Q or the capital word question, and then ask your question after that. And I'll be happy to answer that question here live for you as well. All right, so here's a question, another question here. I have a berm on the horse trail side of our property, currently full of weeds, ivy, foxtails, etc. I'm thinking of cutting that all out and putting in edible perennials, partially for us, but also to divert wildlife so they have a place to eat. Is lemongrass a good place to start as an initial barrier to the ivy? Is it easy to remove if I need to redesign? I also have artichoke and comfrey. I'm at a very early stage and want to make some progress while the weather is dry. Okay, so I'm going to take a crack at answering this, but in a kind of generalized way. For me to be specific, and if it was your property as well, for you to give a specific solution or answer to this, we would need to know more. What's the slope? Where's the solar orientation? How thick are the weeds there? It's probably pretty thick. Are they on the berm and whatnot? So there's basically a few solutions to this issue, but in general, what it would be to do your best to suppress any of those what he's calling weeds. Yes, there's no such thing as a weed, but for the sake of this for this question, we're just going to call them weeds. To suppress them, and then also replace them with both fast growing and slow growing annual and perennial plants that you do want there. So that's the in general thing that we would probably do. And the ways to do that, there's really only 3 ways to start that, right? You can, to suppress those plants at the beginning, there's 3 ways that work. One is mechanically, like you go in with something like a skid steer or a front end loader, and then you scrape off all those plants on the top. And then, you can move them somewhere and then compost the soil and those weeds. And that's quick. It's quick. It's not the preferred method in permaculture, but I've used it a number of times for people who have hired us out. The second way is biologically. So, and this is actually my preferred way, if at all possible. It takes a little bit more time, but you gain so much by doing it. So biologically would basically be moving, using a portable fence, moving animals into the area, having them eat everything to the bare ground. Typically it's a bad thing, but in this case, it's a Kickstarter. And they're also defecating and being animals, so they're adding nutrients. And once they've annihilated all the plants, you get them out of there and then replant with fast and slow growing annual and perennial plants that you do want there that will suppress the other things. And then the other way to do that is shade. So it would just be the same as the first 2, but you're putting tarps over that area if possible, shading everything out to where it decomposes underneath the shade. And this takes at least, it's hard to say, every place is a little bit different. Let's just say half a year, right? You start the shading process at maybe the beginning of spring. So as things are growing, seeds are germinating, they germinate under the shade. but then they come to no light and you basically suffocating the plants out. And then after they've been, it bears the entire soil to do that. It's actually not, it's a good way too. It's better than the mechanical way. It just takes more time. And you don't get the added fertilizer that you would get with the animals. But then again, you would just plant the things there that you want to be there rather than the things that you don't. So kind of a generalized answer, but those are methods to get to where you're trying to go. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that question. We'll move on to the next one. Again, if you're just joining and you have a question here, you can put it in the comments. Just put a capital Q or the word question, and then ask your question there in the comments. And I'll read those here in just a minute when I'm finished with these 1 or 2 questions I have left that I've preloaded. Okay. All right, so here's the last question. This is a big question. If I want to build a house out of one of the methods taught in the architecture session of the course, how do I move forward? Do I hire a structural engineer? Do I hire an architect? Well, what do you recommend? Okay. As always, there's typically not a yes or no answer to permaculture questions. They've got to be kind of decompacted, and more context, more details have to be known about the question, but also the answers sometimes, because there's multiple answers. So there's 2 relatively big routes to take to go on this, and I'm on this route myself. I can show you guys some pictures. I pulled up some pictures of where we're at in the earth bag build. I'll show after this question. So one of the routes is the DIY route, right? So you're going to do it yourself and build the house yourself. And the other one is the hire someone out or hire multiple people out to build it for you. Okay, so you got 2 kind of ways to move forward once you've decided to build a straw bale or earth bag or rammed earth or cob house or whatever it's going to be, wattle and daub, cord wood. So let's start with the DIY route. It's a great route to do because it's going to cost you the least amount of money, cost you time, but that also gives you some good feelings, actually. In another video, I kind of want to talk about what I've just recently started to feel being where we're at in the build right now for my family. But in any case, that I'll talk about that in another video. But so the DIY route is a great route. And actually, let me back up even a little bit further. Earthen houses are typically only built by, like I say, like 2 classes of people. The DIYers, and they could be in any class, but they're going to do it themselves. But as far as I can, financially, it's going to be the lowest cost financially to do that. Like you can build a really like that almost 1,000 square foot house really well for 20 grand, right? That's an amazing price, and it's going to perform better than a stick frame house. Or the very wealthy, right? So then the wealthy typically are hiring the DIYers because there's not a lot of earthen builder. The pool is small. There's not a lot of earthen builders out there. It's always going to be a niche market. And one of the reasons it's going to be a niche market is because the middle class who could pay the payments on it, the banks aren't actually loaning much to earthen buildings, right? So there's this niche that's there for earthen builders that can be utilized. That's but we can talk about that later. So yeah, so if you're going to DIY it and you have no experience and you just took a permaculture design course, like my permaculture design course online, and you said, okay, I'm going to build this house. You don't need to go to carpentry school for 10 years or 2 years and do that. You can take workshops, and that's like that. So in the permaculture design course, I expose you to a number of different building methods. Once you like 1 or 2, go take a number of workshops to get hands-on, and usually workshops, if they're just weekends, you're not getting through the whole build. So you're either doing plastering or the roof or putting in straw bales, but you need to kind of know, like, the foundation, how to install that, how to, make sure water is being wicked away, the wall systems, some framing, you don't have to be an expert carpenter, roof systems, right? So the DIY workshops are great. And the great thing about earthen buildings, these buildings are being built before the idea of architect was around, right? So these earthen houses have been, as long as we've had shelters for humans, right? We've been kind of doing something like that. So my point to say that is you don't need a degree and you don't need a high sophistication level of education or even experience to move forward with that. So that's something to think about. Now, once you feel somewhat confident, you've probably already got a design in mind, right? And you've probably drawn it out on a piece of paper a number of times. It would be worth it then, unless you feel very confident. If you do, go for it, because an earthen building can kind of, the design can change slightly as you're building it. Not so much for the outside, but definitely for the inside, especially if they're not load-bearing walls. But you can get an architect then, and the architect is going to do a great job spacing things out, especially on the interior, right? Where do the doors go when the doors open? Are they going to hit a toilet or a sink? Which, if you have no experience in that, that's where you'd want to rely on an architect, right? And you don't need to do that. You can do it all DIY, but that's a really good option there. If you went to the workshops, you should probably get a good understanding of load bearing. Most of the techniques have some standards, and if you build to those standards, you're probably good structurally. If you're doing something out of the ordinary, then hiring a structural engineer is a really good idea. Let me take that back. It's not a good idea. It is drastically important and more important than hiring an architect. And some architects will hire structural engineers, and there is a bit of structural engineering that architects learn. But a structural engineer, main purpose, it is crunching numbers, loads, weight loads, seismic activity, wind, ice, and looking at what's going to keep this building erect. There's nothing more important than that. So a structural engineer would be extremely valuable if you're going out of the standards that most of these earthen building structures have. Okay, and then there's the hiring people route. So yes, just hire a firm that has a structural engineer in it and has an architect in it, pay for the plans, and then hire some builders out. And you can, do a Google search or something online to figure out where some builders are that come out to you. So all great questions. Okay, those are great. There's a lot more questions in our Q&A. There's a lot more questions on YouTube. And next week when we do this live session, I'm going to answer a couple of those. And it looks like the chat session here is kind of starting to move a bit. So let's go ahead and open it up to live Q&A. Again, if you've just started joining here, if you have a question, just in the chat section, put a capital Q or the word question, so my eyes can kind of scroll through here and know that's a question, just not a comment. And then I'll read the question and I'll answer it for you here live. All right, so here's a question here. No worries. So this one is more technically for the school of permaculture, and probably myself. So the question from Kent Schoberly, and if I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name, what does the future 2022 look like in terms of in-person training and classes? I'm new here, so apologize if you've already addressed this. Now, as far as everybody who teaches permaculture, I'm not sure. 2022 for me in the School of Permaculture, I will probably be opening in-person permaculture design courses back up. And I would have done it this year, except my full-time job at the moment is building the house. So yeah, I should be coming to a close on that here relatively soon, being moved into that house, and then I could refocus and shift back to putting in-person classes on. But in the meantime, you can go to schoolofpermaculture.com, click the red button there in the middle, or online.schoolofpermaculture.com, and you can join my online permaculture design course there. There's lots of content, lots of it. Another question from Freegan Dave Hartman. What do you say about leading an organic lifestyle and the pressure of getting the vaccine? Okay. Well, first and foremost, whatever I have to say about it, who am I? Who really cares? I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. And I have no training in those areas other than autodidactic training. But if I was to say anything, I would say at the top, I would say people are doing their best to make decisions that they can. People are doing the best to make the best decisions they can for them and their family, whether that's motivated by fear or not. You know, that's them. So along with that statement and attached to it is whatever decision that you make, I personally wouldn't want to demand or judge another person for the best decision that they're making and then try to force them into deciding the way I'm thinking, right? I don't think that's the good thing to do. It doesn't appear, obviously, you know, David Holmgren wrote an article about his thoughts on this, and I agree with that a lot. So you might want to look for David Holmgren's, one of his latest articles where he's talking about this this virus. So this virus is obviously real and it's taking people's lives. The numbers have, it appears that they've been skewed multiple times. I know I'm talking to a fellow pediatrician, and you know, he says typically the CDC is given information from MDs, a group of MDs, and they typically follow it. But for whatever reason, with the coronavirus, they're not, and they're coming up with their own suggestions and putting those to the public. So you know, so an organic lifestyle and the pressure of getting the vaccine. Let me take this in a second way to kind of like think about it. If you're being forced to take a vaccine to work somewhere, I would say then something like permaculture will help you a lot, because from the very beginning of, remember, permaculture is just a word, it's a design system is all it is. But you can design a lifestyle where you can go to a place of employment because you want to and not because you choose to. Now, it might take you some capital to get to that point, but you know, if you're being forced to do things you don't want to, I would say don't do those things if you can, and then create a lifestyle where you're not dependent upon the economy stream for you to move forward in life. And permaculture has a tool set that can help you make that a reality. That's probably all I got to say on that at the moment. I was thinking about doing a video, and I might, on just, I'm kind of surprised at a lot of the anti-vaxxers who've changed over this vaccine. And what does anti-vax mean? But anyway, regardless, thanks for the question. And the next question here. All right. Actually, there's quite a lot of chatter in here about the vaccines now. So I'll tell you what, we've spent a good amount of time, and we'll go ahead and put this one to a close. If you like these and you want to learn more in depth about permaculture, I do recommend going to schoolofpermaculture.com and just clicking the big red button there in the center of the screen. And you can look at the different options. My online course, if you did it faithfully every day, you can finish it in 3 months. Nobody ever does, but if you did, you could. And it's only $25 a month, right? It's not a certification level, so there's also that option there. So I made this very accessible for you, for anybody if they just want to learn. So that's a method for diving deeper into permaculture. Also, if you like this and you have more questions about your property or permaculture in general, just ask them, get them ready. I'll be back next week. I'll post a link of where this will be, of what time it will be and what day, typically the day before. So you have an opportunity to learn more at a very accessible way to do it. And then also you have your opportunity here to ask questions. So I appreciate you guys here. Thanks so much. I love the questions. It gives me something to think about for sure. And maybe I'll have some more in-depth answers about vaccines and whatnot later. But hey, bless you guys in the name of Jesus. You guys take care, and I'll see you next week.